There's a version of the internet that most of us don't really think about anymore. Not the one that's optimized, branded, and constantly trying to sell us something. I'm talking about an internet from a time where people were just trying to figure it out. Messy websites, loud music you definitely didn't ask for, and GIFs everywhere. Pages felt less like platforms and more like bedrooms. Today, I want to show you one of the strangest and most fascinating digital spaces still online today. A place built entirely from the remains of the early web. This is Cameron's world. When you first load into Cameron's world, it's just pure 90s chaos. Music immediately starts playing, which, by the way, you can turn off in the top right corner. You're hit with a wall of colour, GIFs, icons, and just movement everywhere. There's no clean layout, no clear starting point, it's just everything, everywhere, all at once. Scattered across the page are dozens of clickable icons. You can press almost anything, and when you do, you're not given some modern web page that's been preserved nicely or rehosted properly. You're being dropped straight into archived web pages that, in most cases, no longer exist anymore, especially on the modern internet. These are pages you would never really stumble across naturally today. Each one of these feels like a little time capsule. Not curated, not optimized, just human and personal. You quickly realise that Cameron's world isn't really a website. It's more of an interactive museum of people who are just figuring out the internet in real time. For example, if you click on the image of the Earth, it takes you to a GeoCities page called Technobabble. It looks like a personal homepage belonging to a guy who just proudly states, "My interests are computers, science, science fiction, and books." Hopefully this site will contain information and links about each of these, and that's it. No branding, not trying to sell you anything, definitely no algorithm, just someone saying, "This is me, this is what I like." And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. As you scroll further down Cameron's world, you start to see dozens of pages just like this. Different interests, different aesthetics, different personalities, but overall, very much the same energy. People experimenting, sharing things they love, making something just because they can. What really surprised me though, is how familiar the kind of humour feels. Even nearly 30 years ago, people were just still people. If you scroll down to the Welcome Home section, and click the little yellow house with the red roof, you're taken to a website called Jar Jar's Cottage. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a shrine to Jar Jar Binks. But right at the top of the page, there's this quote: "Sometimes the one who's clumsy, different, or even a little strange might be the friend you're looking for." And honestly, it really resonated with me. And I'm sure it'll resonate with a lot of people out there too. Being different isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's exactly what you need.
I was just wondering if you wanted to hang out with me and smoke weed and fill our bellies with diet soda and play Burnout Revenge for the PS2.
The rest of the page is what you'd expect, really. A little couple of merch links, random pages, fan fiction, which I'm not clicking into for my own sanity. But even though all of that being said, you can feel the personality bleeding through the screen. The tech is completely rudimentary, the layouts are very messy, especially compared to today's sleek, minimalistic kind of internet. This looks quite ancient in comparison, but it had character, heart, and that's something we've kind of lost along the way. After spending some time in Cameron's world, something interesting starts to happen. The chaos begins to feel quite familiar. You start noticing the same things popping up again and again. Visitor counters at the bottom of the page, flashing under construction signs, animated mailboxes, spinning globes, fire GIFs, and instead of ads, because ads weren't really a thing quite at that point, these pages were just filled with repeating GIFs. And not because people were trying to copy each other deliberately, but because it's just how the early internet spread ideas. Someone would see something cool on one site, save it, and then put it on their own page. I mean, I very much used to do the same thing when I was younger too. You know, there was no real templates at the time, there was no big social media platforms, not quite yet, and it was just mostly just imitation. One of the most fascinating things is just the visitor counter idea. Almost every page had one at the time, and sometimes it's tiny, tucked away at the bottom of the page or something, and sometimes it's just right there in the middle, front and center. It was proudly just showing off numbers like your visitor 457 or visitor 23, and it's worth remembering that these weren't really vanity metrics, not like today with subscribers or how many clicks you get into a website for SEO and things like that. These weren't for engagement rates at all. These were purely just because people were genuinely interested in how many people would come to their website, and it's strangely wholesome. We've kind of lost that along the way. The counter back then wasn't really about popularity, it's about proof of connection. But with the bot-ridden internet today, these kind of things don't work as well, just because, you can get inflated numbers and things. Today, ads follow us across the entire internet, tracking what we look at, what we hover over, what we think about. But back then, visual clutter wasn't monetized at all. It was just expressive. GIFs weren't selling anything, people would just like to have a fire GIF just because vibes, I guess. And because the same handful of images kept getting passed around and around, a kind of unspoken visual language formed, a shared culture built entirely on repetition. What's uncanny about this is everyone thought they were being unique, but they were all just speaking the same digital dialect. Not because an algorithm told them to, but because humans copy what feels familiar. And you can already see this whole vibe is coming back. One of the clearest examples is analog horror. Over the last few years, it's absolutely blown up. Not just in videos, but as websites too. Sites deliberately designed to feel like they were made in the 90s. Low resolution, bad fonts, weird layouts, confusing navigation. Stuff that looks normal at first, then starts to feel very wrong. A really good example of this is the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. At a glance, it looks like a completely normal informational website, something you'd expect to see from an early government or tourism page. Very official, this was made in about 1998. But the longer you click around, the more unsettling it becomes. Details don't quite line up, the tone shifts, information contradicts itself. And at some point you realise the horror isn't on the website is the horror. That's a very early internet idea, using the site itself as an experience. No jump scares, no flashy effects, just quiet, creeping discomfort that builds up the more time you spend there. And if that does sound interesting to you, I highly recommend you go over to Wendigoon's channel, who did an excellent video on the Mystery Flesh Pit, so definitely recommend going to see that. And that's the same feeling you get when you explore Cameron's world. That sense you stumbled into something that wasn't made for you, something that was never meant to be seen outside of its original context. Just like fashion cycles back, baggy jeans, old trainers, things we'd swore we'd never wear again, the internet's starting to do the same thing. People are tired of everything being perfectly rounded, perfectly branded, perfectly optimized, so they're going backwards. Back to weird layouts, back to personal websites, back to projects that feel handmade, imperfect, and a little uncomfortable. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing more early internet-inspired websites, and hopefully, more projects like the Mystery Flesh Pit. It'd be nice to have more things that look like they shouldn't exist anymore, but do. And that's why Cameron's world hit so hard. It comes from a time before the internet fully understood its own power, before everything was tracked, measured, and optimized. It reminds us that the internet wasn't always about efficiency. There was a human connection there too. An internet that was messier, more human, and, well, less polished. And walking through Cameron's world feels like stepping back into that moment in time, one that shouldn't really be accessible anymore, but luckily it still is.